As Canadians prepare to mark tomorrow's National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, we are taking a close look at just how Canada has lived up to its commitments to Indigenous people. 10 years ago, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released 94 calls to action on achieving reconciliation. Since then, Indigenous Watchdog says 14 have been completed. The group, which tracks progress on the calls to action, says 16 have not started, 22 are stalled, and 42 are what's described as in progress. For more on where Canada stands on advancing reconciliation, we're joined by Negan Sinclair, Professor of Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba. Good morning.
Good morning.
Negan, it's been a decade since your late father, Senator Murray Sinclair, made these recommendations public. How far along would you say this country is on the path towards reconciliation?
Well, on one level, there's lots of reasons to be pessimistic. Certainly, we keep seeing similar cycles of mistakes that have been made over long periods of time, over 150 years. There continues to be a very brutal Indian Act in place. Most of the land that was stolen is still stolen. And then, of course, there is this ongoing sort of dysfunctional relationship between Indigenous peoples and the federal government in the issue of child welfare, justice. There's lots of reasons to have concern, but then September hits and you start to see that hundreds and thousands of Canadians are more competent than ever. They're learning about histories that many of them, especially from my age and above, never had a chance to. And the young kids, the students, I'm in Toronto speaking to a bunch of high schools today. They are competent. They absolutely understand that this is a critical issue and you have to put Indigenous peoples at the center for every single economic issue, environmental issue, and every single step forward in this country. And then you realize that we are making progress as you read out the calls to action and what's been completed, about a dozen completed or so, 40 are underway. And think about it, 150 years it took for us to get here to this very dysfunctional, toxic relationship that is highly problematic, is really it creates dysfunction across the country. And it's going to take us 150 years to get to a different place. And in 10 years, we've done some substantial work.
And I would really say, and I welcome your input on this, that really that has accelerated in the last probably 4 to 5 years, really is when we've seen this awareness increase. The Indigenous Watchdog also tracks progress on the calls to action by category, and you mentioned one of them. None of the calls to action involving child welfare, health, and education have been completed. How is Canada falling short here?
Again, you can look at those calls to action and say, okay, so they're not done. We have ones that are done. There are certain calls to action, about 3/4 of them, that will just never be done. They will be ongoing. For instance, at what point will we act appropriately and legally when it comes to fulfilling the Constitution and work and consulting adequately with Indigenous peoples? That's an ongoing task. And most of the calls that you talked about in health and child welfare, these are ongoing tasks, training child welfare workers, training nurses and doctors to be able to act appropriately, to not cut people's hair when they come in or ask respectfully, to work with certain Indigenous spiritual traditions when it comes to medicine, and Indigenous medicinal practices, and so on and so forth. It's concerning, though, that we see some very destructive trends in those two institutions you talked about, especially child welfare. Where I come from in the prairies, Indigenous children make up 90% of the child welfare system. And so that ties distinctly with poverty, with ongoing cycles of, for instance, over-policing in communities. There are some very problematic trends that then is the outcome is children are removed from homes, often forcibly and unnecessarily.
You mentioned consultation also being one of the key elements to take a look at, and this year's National Day for Truth and Reconciliation comes right as Ottawa is facing this growing criticism over Bill C-5. First Nations in Ontario are taking the federal government to court over the One Canadian Economy Act, says it violates their treaty rights. How has this controversy highlighted the importance of Indigenous consultation and how seriously it's been taken and defining what consultation actually means?
Well, consultation means that you include all stakeholders, rights holders, from the beginning of the project's inception. Okay, so what does that really mean? Does it mean that when Ottawa comes up with an idea, let's say for a mine or a pipeline or a highway or anything involving the land, 100% of it involves Indigenous peoples? But to keep Indigenous peoples out of the decision-making position and to announce that you're going to have these projects of the national interest and then include Indigenous peoples way after the fact, or even worse, which is what the federal government did this time, is just handpicked Indigenous peoples that they like and not worked with the people who they don't like or don't agree with. It is a very significant toxic mistake to continue to divide Indigenous peoples up to, based on economic projects. We've seen this before. This has been 150 years, really, until the time of Justin Trudeau. And Prime Minister Trudeau, while made many mistakes during his time and perhaps had met as many stumbles as there was successes, Justin Trudeau was the first prime minister to really care, to engage Indigenous issues meaningfully. Every prime minister before that, including his own father, were harmful and cruel. And so what we have is we have a kind of moment, this 10 years of progressive steps. And in many ways, we're repeating some problematic steps over the past few months of this first new prime minister. Now, he has good people around him. He needs to listen to those Indigenous peoples, many of whom I think are working very hard and engaging the Indigenous communities much more meaningfully than some of the missteps that have been taking place over the first few months.
Negan Sinclair, Professor of Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba. I always appreciate our conversations. Thanks for coming on today.
Miigwech, I hope everybody wears an orange shirt and goes for a walk and learns a little bit about this country's history. Miigwech.
Thanks so much, Negan. If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.